Welcome to the Tewanee Joseph Show. I'm here with Paula Amos, Chief Marketing and Development Officer for Indigenous Tourism BC. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you for having me in your studio today, Tewanee. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's great. I've had a chance to work with Indigenous tourism in the past and work with you specifically. And just the amount of work for Indigenous tourism that you do for many of the different stakeholders, experiences that are Indigenous across British Columbia, it is pretty incredible. So tell me a little bit about what's happening with Indigenous Tourism BC these days.
Awesome. Yeah, there's lots of exciting things going on with Indigenous Tourism BC. We're celebrating our 27th year coming up in November at our AGM coming up. We've been working hard after the pandemic to make sure that the businesses have survived, and we're coming out stronger than ever. We have over 200 different Indigenous tourism experiences. So they range from outdoor adventure, wildlife viewing, culinary and cuisine and wellness, arts and culture, of course. And we have many beautiful resorts that you can go and visit when you're traveling throughout British Columbia.
Well, it is pretty incredible. And I know that there's even an app and those types of things. So, listeners should certainly hit up the app. Is it Indigenous Tourism BC? Is that the app?
Yes. Make sure that you hit up the Indigenous Tourism BC app, and you can get all of the experiences that we have in that app. That's the easiest way that you can connect. We're just in the middle of updating our consumer website. So that will be launched the plan is to launch it at our AGM in November.
Great. And I think, it's also actually when I travel, and I've had a chance to travel in different places around the world, I'm always constantly trying to look for Indigenous experiences and stuff. So around BC, certainly locally in the greater Vancouver area and Vancouver Island, what are the types of tourism experiences that people can actually do here at home?
Yeah, I think the traveler is definitely changing where they want to have an authentic experience. And here in BC, looking for that authentic Indigenous experience. We always say that if you're coming to British Columbia, you can't travel here without including an Indigenous experience. While you're here in BC, we have such a diverse culture here in BC, over 200 different nations. So wherever you go, it's going to be a bit of a different experience. So if you're arriving in Vancouver, you're going to arrive into our beautiful airport, YVR. They have one of the largest collections of Indigenous art. So you're going to know the place you're arriving is definitely Indigenous place. You're going to know more about the people. And if you want to learn more, you can start off going to Salmon and Bannock restaurant. It's the only Indigenous owned restaurant. There's the Bill Reid Art Gallery.
That Salmon and Bannock actually is, there's a place downtown Vancouver, right? Like there's a restaurant there, but there's also in the international, is there an international location for them in the YVR airport as well?
Yes, that's right. They have Salmon and Bannock on the fly now at the airport. So that's their airport location, Salmon and Bannock on the fly. And then in downtown Vancouver, they have Salmon and Bannock. We have game. We got game. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. And what are some of the other experiences around Vancouver?
Let's see. You could include Tulese Tours, one of their Talking Trees tours in Stanley Park, which is great because it's right in the heart of the city. You can go to North Vancouver and do a Takaya Tours canoe tour, and you will learn more about the Tsleil-Waututh people and their connection to the lands as you're going through the water in one of their canoes. We now have some tours that you can take with Indigenous-owned airlines. One of them is the Gulf Island Seaplanes, and they'll take you on a tour by plane. So you can do plane.
And what's the name of that airline? Is that Isquo Air? Is that the right?
There's Isquo Air, and that's located in South Vancouver, but there's also the Gulf Island Seaplanes, and they're currently offering a seaplane tour where they'll take you around and show you the different landmarks that are around the city.
Okay, and if we kind of travel, now, we've done Vancouver, kind of North Van, through Stanley Park and things, but now taking a tour over to Vancouver Island, what are the kinds of experiences we can have over in Vancouver Island?
Yeah, Vancouver Island has has so much to offer when you want to go outdoor adventure, wildlife viewing. So you can go bear viewing with a number of different First Nations Indigenous owned businesses. So on the east coast of the island, you have Hamalko Wildlife Adventures. You can go to Klahoose Adventures, where you can have a destination stay, and then you can go bear viewing. You can go for some whale watching. North Island as well, a number of different outdoor adventure, and of course some cultural adventures as well when you go to Umista Cultural
Incredible.
Center.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we kind of come back over to the mainland, then head up into the interior. So once we get into kind of Okanagan area, I've been up there and I've been to some of the restaurants, and unbelievable, but the experiences are also incredible up there. What do we have up in the Okanagan?
Yeah, there's a number of experiences in the Okanagan. You have the Inkameep Winery, which was the only Indigenous owned winery in North America. They have an Inkameep Cultural Center as well, which you learn more about the people in the Okanagan area. You have Kukuli Cafe. Don't panic, we have Bannock. They have 3 locations, which is always great to go and see. You can go to the Secwepemc Cultural Center in Kamloops. And recently there is Hat Creek Ranch, which has been recently acquired by the Bonaparte Nation. So Hat Creek Ranch is still there. It's a great experience that you can go and see, but it's now going to have more of a Bonaparte First Nation type of background to it.
Okay. And why don't we go Kootenays and then up north from there? So what do we have out in the Kootenays?
Let's see, Kootenay Rockies. You're going to have you can go and visit the, oh my goodness. They have a beautiful 4.5-star resort, in Cranbrook. You can go there. They also have a cultural center. They also have a golf course that you can go and have a destination stay. They have the Hainsworth. Oh my goodness, my mind has gone blank. They have the hot springs at Hainsworth.
Right. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, there's so many beautiful natural experiences that you can go and see when you're right up against the Rockies.
And then going up north, up in the northern part of British Columbia, what are some of the experiences up there?
So the north is such a vast area. You have Nisga'a experiences where you can go and see some of their experiences and outdoor adventures. A lot of great hiking in the north. You can go whale watching, bear viewing once you get over to the Prince Rupert area. And then, of course, you have Haida Gwaii, where you can do some really great cultural immersion. It's always one of the bucket lists that people look at. And then on Central Coast is the Great Bear Rainforest. So that's always on people's bucket lists too.
Pretty incredible. And remind me again, how many in tourism experiences products do we have in just British Columbia alone?
So we have about 400 Indigenous tourism experiences, which ranges from transportation, but also all of the outdoor adventure, wildlife viewing. So we're pretty fortunate, and being an entrepreneurial province, and the First Nations here are all getting into Indigenous tourism as an economic driver. And it's also such a great way that we can tell our stories and educate the visitors who we are and our deep connection to our lands.
And that's a big part of it, is telling stories. I mean, having, as you mentioned, just over 200 or so First Nations in British Columbia, our cultures are so diverse, and there are many different experiences. It's not the same everywhere you go here on the coast, North Coast, Northwest Coast, interior, Kootenays. It's such an incredible experience to be able just to discover within this province and hear the storytellers of those lands. It's pretty incredible. And I think for Indigenous tourism, it's such an important part of the economy, and having more Indigenous peoples participating that way and being net contributors to the economy. And that's a big part of it.
Yeah, for sure. My goal in my career was always to work in economic development for First Nations people. So I'm fortunate that I get to work in Indigenous tourism, and I still love this job and what it brings to our communities from the economic development side, but also it brings more connection to our lands with youth and elders learning learning more of our stories and our history. And it also builds that more cultural capital, if that's a word that we need to use. I think it's a good way for us to build that storytelling in our communities and learning our songs, but it's also educating the visitors more about who we are. I think one of the biggest goals, because I've been working with Indigenous Tourism BC for over 20 years, and it was always a goal back then that we want to create a strong Indigenous identity when visitors are coming here. But I think that as we're reaching those goals through Indigenous Tourism BC, we want to make sure that visitors, that they identify British Columbia, Canada with Indigenous people. So
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And, it's such the global world. I mean, globally things are big. The world is big, but it's actually not that big, especially with Indigenous tourism and connections. Now, I got a couple calls from a couple of friends down in New Zealand. So, my father having roots from Taranaki and such, but were you down there with your daughter? Because they were calling me and saying, "Hey, I met your cousin down here."
That's true. It's a small, small world. And as soon as I say I'm a Squamish Nation, they're like, "Oh, do you know Tewanee?" So my daughter and I were there in February. We were there for an Indigenous Women in Industry conference. And then we added on an extra week to go and visit and learn more about the Maori Indigenous tourism area. So yes, I was there. It was so amazing. And that was on my bucket list. So super happy that I was there.
So did you make it to the North and South Island as well?
I only made it to the North Island, and there's still lots that I want to see on the North Island. I want to make it to the tip in the Waitangi area, but I do want to make it to the South Island as well. So I think I could spend an easy 6 to 8 weeks traveling.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, and then you go to the South Island, the North Island, and then you go up to Cape Ranga, and then there's Paihia, where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, and they have an annual event there. But you can really make your way around, and there really is so many connections to people there. And, particularly with Canadians and people from Canada and traveling down to New Zealand, there's still a lot of connections all the time.
Yeah, there are a lot of connections. I know back in the 80s, one of my uncles did a totem pole, and it was brought there for the Commonwealth Games. That was there towards the end of the 80s. So when I went there, I made sure that I got to go and visit the totem pole that my family did many, many years ago. So yeah, it was those connections that we do have.
Well, it truly is all about connections and building networks, in particular tourism. Thank you, Paula. We're going to take a break, and we're going to listen to some incredible Indigenous music, and we'll come back with some connection stories. Welcome back to the Tewanee Joseph Show. I'm here with Paula Amos, Chief Marketing and Development Officer for Indigenous Tourism BC. Now, Paula, we were talking about connections and how important those are, but recently there's been some developments, but also some connections that you made in New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah. Excuse me. Absolutely. We made so many connections through my travels through Indigenous Tourism BC. A few years ago, I was in Australia at the World Indigenous Tourism Summit, and I met a lady there, Nadine Toy, and she has a business in New Zealand. So she was all excited about doing some Indigenous tourism work with the youth, and that's an area that I'm super interested in too. So she had told me about this, creating this Native Nations, tracing our ancestors' footsteps and using tourism as that vehicle and bringing youth into it. So she started it last year, and she included Australia and New Zealand, the Bay of Plenty area. And then this year we talked some more with her team and our team here at ITBC. So we included BC, Canada, as part of that Native Nations. So it became a tri-country Indigenous tourism Native Nations. So it's pretty exciting to travel and go and meet the youth, but also travel their ancestors' trails and empower the youth through Indigenous tourism and using Indigenous tourism for the good.
It brings people together. And I think also the the pride in sharing culture is so important. I think that's important for people to understand too, is when you share songs and you share the dances and you share the stories, the oral traditions that have been passed on from generation to generation, it instills such pride in the people that are sharing. And that's important. That's an important part of what they do. And, I was happy to get a call from you and a message from you that these groups were coming up from New Zealand and Australia, young professionals and youth that were coming up to experience up here. So, kind of walk the footsteps of ancestors that have walked up here, and really practicing the protocol is really important. I know that it's very important for people to understand that's not only important here, but it's important when we go places. So thank you for inviting me down to the Chief Joe Mathias Center and being able to experience the culture from the Maori culture, which I'm half Maori as well. And then, the Indigenous cultures from Australia. Now, what did they get up to when they're here in Vancouver or here in British Columbia?
Yeah, so we put together a 10-day itinerary for the countries, Australia and New Zealand, and then, of course, our Canadian youth. And it was really to immerse them in the cultures, but it was also to go deeper into our cultures, and protocols is a big part of that. So we wanted to make sure that wherever we went, we did protocol in some form. I mean, protocol can take a long time when we're doing that kind of work with our communities. So some were in depth, but some were a bit more just ingrained into the Indigenous tourism experience that we did. So yeah, we welcomed them here. We did protocol with Squamish Nation, and it was great that you were able to come there. But we got to show them, we put together an itinerary where it was just amazing because our landscapes were similar in a lot of ways, but the landscapes that we were able to show and the Indigenous tourism experiences were pretty stunning to showcase the Sea to Sky Highway, going over to Kamloops, showing them our oceans, our rivers, our lakes, and how connected we are to the lands that we have. It was pretty incredible to watch the youth grow and become leaders in all the ways that they're already working. Many of them work with young kids and youth in their areas. They're all young. They were 17 to maybe 22 years old, but they're language leaders, they're cultural leaders, they're song and dance leaders. Many of them are composing songs. So whenever we would do any of the cultural sharing, the cultural exchanges, you just watched the young kids, the elders, they would just light up and smile because I think it just makes them happy and happy to see that cultures are so strong around the world, but also showcasing what we have here in BC too.
Yeah, and part of it, coming to the communities, the MST nations, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. But one of the things I observed too was just how they started to not only in the beginning of their trip interact with one another, First Nations culture, Maori culture, and Indigenous culture from Australia, but seeing and hearing the didgeridoo and the dances by the female and the males from Australia, but also the Maori with the guitar. It really helped revitalize their language, the guitar. And so when you hear that and you hear the language and you see the poi balls and the culture being shared that way, and then our First Nations drumming and singing and dancing, by the end of the trip, I don't know what happened during their journey because it looked like they had an incredible time. But I had a chance, and thank you for inviting me to their last night here in Vancouver. But just the growth in that time frame that they were here, but also the interaction of culture, how they were supporting one another was so powerful to be able to see that.
It really was. So you mentioned the didge, the guitars, the poi, and the drums that we use here in BC. By the end of it, those were gifts given to the Maori and the people from Australia were each gifted a drum because they wanted to learn and add it to all of their instruments. But the kids all learned each other's songs. They learned each other's dances. Many of them learned how to play the drum. So it was really neat to see the cultures come together and support each other. And it was amazing because they were tasked to do a mashup and do something together, but it ended up they would learn all of the powerful songs and dances of each other. And it was just incredible to watch. And I will miss that.
Absolutely. Well, maybe what are three things that stand out for you on that trip? Because it's a lot of work to pull it together. But here in British Columbia, it's not just only experiencing the Indigenous culture, it's all the people here in British Columbia. And I believe that things are transforming in British Columbia, where our culture is not just more accepted, but the reconciliation path has begun. But what are three of the things that stand out for you for this trip?
Yeah, three things that really stand out for me is the time that we had to reflect. And it's important that we give each other that time to reflect so that we can slow down and learn, because we can be so fast in our lives. So it was nice to have that time with all of the youth and be inspired. And I learned so much from each of them, whether it was just their big hearts that they brought to the table while we were all learning from each other's culture, watching the growth that they each had, and knowing that they're going to go home and do great things in their community. I think we built a community with these young leaders, and they're going to go back to their communities, and they're already learning and know how they're going to build communities once they get back. The other piece that I'm going to bring back is just the shift of community and how we can build that global community in a good way, and using tourism for the good. I think tourism is a great vehicle for reconciliation, and it's a good way that we can educate the world about who we are through Indigenous tourism.
Absolutely. And we'll have to take a trip sometime where when you're in New Zealand and I'm in New Zealand, we can kind of connect up and share culture and on all those kinds of things as well. So what is Indigenous tourism? And it sounded like an incredible trip in, Lower Mainland, they going up to the interior too. Where else did they go? Were that the main areas?
Those were the main areas. They started in Vancouver. They went up to Whistler, and within those areas, of course, they experienced Squamish-Lillooet Cultural Center, Chile tours, where they went on a Love the Land tour, learned more about our medicines and how significant the cedar tree is to our people. We went over to Houston, which is one of the territories, but just outside of Lillooet, and we learned their traditional fishing. We went into one of their ishkins to look at how traditionally their houses would have been. It was just incredible, diverse landscapes that we have.
Sure. Absolutely. And that's, the ability to do that and share, we have so many treasures here in British Columbia. It's incredible. And I think the amount of working together, that's what I've seen over the past number of years, even more so maybe since 2010, that there's been a real connection between all Indigenous and non-Indigenous tourism groups, because we're all together on this, and that's the one thing I learned about tourism is, if it's a positive experience, everybody shares in that positivity around it. If it's not a great experience, then that's the same. So we are really connected. Speaking about connections earlier, what are some of the other things that you've been working on at Indigenous Tourism BC?
Let's see, we have a number of innovative ways that we're working together with the communities. We're 26 years old, coming up to 27 years old. So we're just really strategizing, who do we want to be for the next 20 years, and looking at our branding. How do we make sure that we're positioned to the world and educate the world? We work closely with Destination BC and Destination Canada to make sure that we are represented within the key markets that we work with. So we're working on a big project right now. It's a long-term project, Iconics. And I like this big project because it really makes sure that Indigenous people are part of the identity or the fabric of who British Columbia is, the landscapes, the culture, the people. So that's a huge project I'm excited about. It's a long-term project. We're also going to start implementing Iconics project. And next week we go to Germany to start to implement part of the Iconics. It's a different way. It's an inspiring way for visitors to look at traveling to BC and making it easier and just making sure that we're always competitive.
Well, thank you, Paula, Chief Marketing Officer, Paula Amos, Chief Marketing Officer Development for Indigenous Tourism BC. Sounds like there's so many things on the go that you have. And I think the main thing that I've learned, just in our conversation today is that there are so many incredible experiences here in British Columbia. But not only that is that we as Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples are working together to make a better British Columbia. Really, it sounds like to me. So in the future, my question for you is, will you come back and as you start to implement Iconics, which I think is a really important program, and tell us more about some of the other Indigenous experiences that are moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to come back and tell you more. And there's so much that we could talk about. You touched on the 2010 Olympics, and that was really a world stage that was a great catalyst for us to educate the world who we are.
Absolutely. Paula Amos, thank you for being here and look forward to talking to you again in the future. Hoichka.
Hoichka. Klako.